What's the likelihood of the Maple Leafs winning the Atlantic Division? We'll debate that and more on today's Cosign No Sign edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
You're Locked On Maple Leafs, your daily podcast on the Toronto Maple Leafs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Leafs podcast, a daily Maple Leafs-centric podcast hosted by myself, Mike DiStefano, and my co-host, Dave Morassutti. What's going on, brother? How we feeling on a Wednesday?
Feeling pretty good, one day away from the big time matchup.
Definitely is a big matchup. We got the Florida Panthers coming to town, and currently those two teams separated by just 2 points at the top of the Atlantic Division. And the Panthers, some big news this past week. We didn't really dive into it on yesterday's podcast, but I believe Monday this news came out that Aaron Ekblad, their star defenseman, is suspended for 20 games. So that's the remainder of the regular season plus 2 additional playoff games for violating the league's PED PD clause or whatever the hell you want to call it, the substance abuse program for performance enhancing substances. That kind of caught me off guard, Dave. I did not expect. You don't see that happen in hockey. Like you see it in football, you see it in baseball. You don't really see that happen in our sport here.
No, and I'll never forget one of the more bizarre, maybe like drug infractions happened in the Olympics when Backstrom took something for a cold, and the IOC, it had one banned substance from the IOC, and he could not play. I think it was against Canada in the Olympics in one of the medal games, and it's like it's so bizarre to hear any of that because these athletes are so regimented. They watch anything they eat, anything, and I'm like, you had no idea that whatever you were taking wasn't on the banned list?
Yeah, supposedly not. And we saw Aaron Ekblad put out a statement apologizing to Panthers faithful. He took ownership of it. Like he knows he took whatever substance that was on the ban list, and he said that he should have spoke with Panther doctors. Apparently, he took something while he was injured earlier in this year to try and recover quicker. And well, yeah, like you can't do that. If it's on the ban list, it's on the ban list. And he got subject to a random drug test, and he got popped for some sort of performance enhancing substance. So no Aaron Ekblad for the Panthers for the next 20 games. So that's 18 regular season games plus an additional 2 playoff games. So he wouldn't play for the first couple playoff games as well, which means he's not going to be able to play against the Maple Leafs tomorrow night, Dave, when they come to town to take on the Toronto Maple Leafs. So we know that, that's going to be a very important game for both teams. The Toronto Maple Leafs, they could tie the Florida Panthers with a win in that game at top of the table. And Florida, obviously, looking to put a little bit of a cushion. But, man, does that Seth Jones trade ever look like an absolute savior of a deal that they've made now that they're without Ekblad? At least they've replaced that and those minutes with Seth Jones.
Yeah, it's crazy because, they've been without Aaron Ekblad for many times over the years because of injuries, but they never had anyone like a Seth Jones that could step up and take those minutes. And like that blue line has always been a question mark. I don't know how they are able at times to be competitive with the blue line that they have, just because like they don't have it's taken a hit over the years, right? You lose Montour, you lose OEL, right? And then, but they always had Ekblad. Forsling has been good for them. But at a time like this, like especially this stretch now, your depth certainly gets tested. And man, if for those who are scoreboard watching on Tuesday night, you got a nice treat when you saw a 3-goal blown, three goals allowed in the third period to the Bruins to lose. I thought the Panthers were going on to win that game. They allow 3 unanswered goals in the third period for Boston to win that 3-2. So first off, thank you, Boston, for that gift. That's been 2 gifts from Boston since the trade deadline. They maybe that was sort of an inside job from Boston, right? All right, we'll trade all these guys, but we're gonna make sure that we'll help. You may pay a little bit more for Carlo, but that means we'll also give a little more back in these games we play against Florida and Tampa.
Yeah, we'll pick off some points off Tampa and Florida this week, so that you guys can stay in lockstep as you lose some games. But yeah, it's gonna be a dogfight the rest of the way, man. For this Atlantic Division, I mean, you've got those 3 teams: Florida, Toronto, Tampa, all within 5 points of each other. Florida at the top at 83 points. They're with what they got there, 17 games to go. Toronto's 18 games to go. They're at 81. And Tampa also 18 games to go. They've got 78 points. So just 3 points back of the Maple Leafs. But all 3 teams in their last 10 games just continue to win games. Panthers 8-2 in their last 10. The Tampa Bay Lightning 7-2 in their last 10. And the Maple Leafs 6-3-1. In their last 10 games as well. So, it's going to be an absolute dogfight. And that leads us into the first cosign, no sign. And for those who are new to the podcast and haven't seen us do this segment, we pop it out from time to time. But it's cosign, no sign. We'll both make statements to each other. And if we agree with the statement, we'll give it a good old cosign. If we disagree, we'll no sign it. And Dave, my first cosign, no sign to you on the topic of this hard race towards the finish in the Atlantic Division. The Toronto Maple Leafs will win the Atlantic Division. Cosign, no sign, Dave.
I'm going to cosign it because I think they actually understand the importance of winning the division and the need to not go up against either one of Florida or Tampa in round 1.
I would say all 3 teams
understand
the importance of that, which is why all 3 teams were aggressive at the deadline.
But you look at it, even through this, that 3-game losing streak, they're still 6-3-1 in their last 10. And right, Florida's on such. I know Florida's on a heater. Tampa's on a bit. Tampa's lost 2 games in a row now.
But prior to that, they're one of the hottest teams in hockey.
Yeah, prior to that, they were the hot. Yeah, Victor Hedman is dealing with something as well. I think right now Florida, they don't have Matthew Tkachuk for the rest of the year. Now they don't have for the rest of the regular season. They don't have Aaron Ekblad for the rest of the regular season. Sure, in a couple weeks, soonish, Brad Marchand will be in the fold. I just don't know how long they will be able to sustain those losses for and keep up their form without those crucial players in the lineup. Now, knock on wood, the Leafs don't have any hiccups like that along the way, because it's very possible. But I think the Leafs right now are better set up over the long term once the new additions settle in and once the goaltending gets back on track. I think the Leafs are a good bet to get themselves back in the top of the division.
All right, so you liking that little bet there? Yeah, I think it's going to be really difficult, but I think that there's a chance for it to happen. Obviously, I was taking a look at the schedule in terms of strength of schedule the rest of the way. Maple Leafs have one of the easier schedules. I think it's in terms of strength. It would be 21st hardest, which would make that the 12th easiest schedule or something like that, 12th to 13th easiest schedule in the league. Whereas you look at Florida, and Florida's got one of the more harder schedules, the 13th hardest schedule so far, or the rest of the way. So, in terms of that, the Leafs should be able to pick up a couple more points. They've got more games against non-playoff opponents. But you got to win those games, right? They still have to win those games. You can't lose, points to teams like San Jose, and you got to try and pick up points against, teams like Florida. They've got 3 more games against the Panthers between now and the end of the regular season. So you think you got to win at least 2 of those 3, right? Have to, mandatory win 2 of 3. Because if you lose 2 of 3, all of a sudden that gap widens and you got to make those points and games up elsewhere. So those are going to be crucial. That game tomorrow night is going to be crucial. When you look at how this division could shake out. It's funny. I was looking at moneypuck.com, and they give the Leafs just a 22% chance of finishing in first place in the division. Florida somehow 64%. There's only 2 points between the two. Why the hell is there such a large discrepancy between the Panthers and Leafs to finish at the top of the table? That made no sense to me when I saw that. But I'm with you. I think that the Leafs still have a good chance. And Florida, I think those injuries and the suspension, could end up playing a pretty big factor in those guys maybe limping in a little bit. I will say this, though. Those teams, Florida, Tampa, they've really had a next man up mentality for a long time now. It's part of their identity. And those teams can score. Like, they can put pucks to the back of the net and they can get goals up and down their lineup. And the goaltending has been there as well for those teams too. So we'll see. I think it's going to be a thrilling race, but hey, Toronto's got just as much a shot. And to your point, whoever ends up winning that division is going to have to take a breath of relief in round one. Not that they're going to get an easy matchup, because I think that it doesn't matter who the Leafs are playing in round one. It's always going to be a little worrisome for Toronto faithful. But, man, I would not want to have to go through, that 2-3 hole. And then, when you play Florida or Tampa, whoever it ends up being as the second seed and third seed, then you have to go and play Florida or Tampa in the next round. Oh boy, it'd just be difficult. Be a lot easier if the Leafs can just end up with that top seed and play one of the wild card teams and kind of roll the dice from there. As of now, they're playing the Tampa Bay Lightning in round number 1. All right, so that was the first cosign, no sign. Let's take a break and continue on the other side. Dave's got a couple more. I got a couple more. So we'll do that next here on the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you a chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. You can stay in on the action with tournament games happening almost every day. There's always something exciting to bet on, and the FanDuel app is simple to use. And when I win, I get paid instantly. There's no waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. I'm Mike DiStefano. Got Dave Morassutti with me here as we do each and every weekday, Monday through Friday. Free and available on all podcasting platforms and also up on YouTube. It's an off day in Leafs Nation. There's no practice yesterday, and there's no Leafs game tonight. They got a couple days off before taking on quite a tough opponent in the Florida Panthers, as we noted in the segment prior. So that'll be tomorrow. So on tomorrow's show, be sure to come back. We'll preview and get you set for that game tomorrow. But we'll continue with some cosign, no sign. Dave, what's your first one for me?
I'm looking at the lineup, and I think the Leafs would be better served if Bobby McMann was playing in the top 6 on the second line with John Tavares and William Nylander.
Okay, repeat that one again for me.
I think the Leafs would be better served if Bobby McMann was playing in the top 6 with John Tavares and William Nylander.
I'm going to no sign it. I'm going to no sign it. I understand the premise. I really do. But I think the Leafs, I like them more as a top 9 team if Bobby McMahon's still on the third line. My issue is I don't want Max Domi on that third line. And if you put McMahon up, that leaves Domi still chilling on that third line. And if you want to use Scott Laughton in a pure checking role, you don't want to have Max Domi on that line. So why they're trying to force feed Domi into that third line on Laughton's wing makes no sense to me. It has not worked. It's not working. I would try him elsewhere. I would put him up in the top 6. That's personally where I think I would want him to play. And it kind of goes along with one of my cosign, no signs, Dave. So maybe we can kind of mix two together, because mine was going to be the Toronto Maple Leafs should mix up the top 6 or maybe the top 9 after this poor play of late. And what I would like to see is Domi end up in the top 6 and possibly on the top line, and maybe even a little flip-flop of Marner and Nylander. But overall, I think the top 6 just needs a shakeup in general.
I do. I just look at the last few games, and I'll
also say this: Bob McMahon has not. He's kind of been quiet the last little bit too, I should say. Like, I think he's goalless in like 10 straight games.
Yeah,
I think he only has like 7 or 8 shots in those games. Like, there was a while where I was betting on FanDuel, and he was just 2+ shots every night. Boom, 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 and he went on a stretch of games here recently where he went like 4 or 5 games without a shot on goal. It was quite bizarre to see. And I get it. He's in, playing more of a defensive role in the third line, but you kind of want to see more if you want to elevate someone into your top 6 like that.
Well, that's fair. I think something needs to change between the second and third lines. Just haven't seen enough from them. And like we saw, I think it was the other night where we saw Marner play with Tavares at one point, just because things were not going well. I think that might have been against Vegas or something. But like, I'm not seeing the chemistry with the third line. It's gonna take. I understand it takes time, but Cal Yarncroc, I'm glad he's off the fourth line at least, because I don't know why he was on the fourth line. For that stretch when he came back, I feel like he's more of a middle 6 guy than he is a fourth liner. And thankfully now Holmberg is back on the fourth line. I feel like that was kind of necessary. Yeah, they got to do something where you got to get Tavares and Nylander going more offensively, especially Nylander. I know he's still putting up points and all that, but I feel like there's been a bit of a lull there. So if it's Max Domi to get those other 2 guys going, that's fine with me. I just think that the way it's currently, I just don't like the lines as they're currently put out there.
Yeah, so we're kind of both in lockstep there that we should see some sort of change up. And look, like the Leafs, you look at the last 10 games or so, and their offense, especially at 5-on-5, has not been good, Dave. Like it simply hasn't. Like, yeah, they're scoring a little bit here and there, but in terms of their expected goals, I'm looking at this right now. Expected goals over the course of the last 10 games. Actually, let me sort this. I'm going to sort this by rates so that it's not necessarily, but yeah. So let me quickly figure out what the number is here. So over the last 10 games, expected goals per 60. You're looking at a Toronto Maple Leafs team that currently ranks 31st in the NHL. 31st in the NHL, averaging 2.01 expected goals per 60 minutes of play. 31st, Dave. It's just not working right now, what's going on with this offense. And yeah, like you said, hey, they're winning games, They're 6-3-1 in that stretch. They're winning games, but they're getting it from the power play, and because that's been pretty hot of late. And they've gotten some timely goals. Defense have been scoring a little bit here and there. They're getting some scoring from up and down the lineup. They're getting a little lucky. But, man, that's just not enough generation. So I think this offense really needs a bit of a kick in the ass. And I'm with you. I think an overall – let's jumble them up and see what we can do. I don't know if you necessarily try that against Florida. Is that the team you want to just kind of jumble it all up against? I don't know. Maybe you do it this weekend against Ottawa, though, in that Saturday night game in the Battle of Ontario. If it doesn't work in Florida, like you're coming off a win against Utah, but again, it didn't look great. But something needs to change. It seems like the offense has just been a bit stale for me over the course of the last, month or so of the season.
Now, what do you think of, somebody had brought up the idea, I can't remember where I saw, but of maybe, you keep that third line of Domi, McMahon, and Robertson that was kind of working right offensively for the longest time, and you consider Lawton on the wing.
Like I don't hate. No, I don't like it. Like you brought in Scott Lawton to be your 3P. You gave up a high price to solidify your center depth and get yourself a shutdown matchup third line center. Why are you going to move off that after 2 games doesn't make any sense to me. Because although that line was scoring, right? Domi, Robertson, it didn't. It's not like it was, a defensive matchup line. And now you're putting that onus on Tavares and on Nylander. And I guess Scott Lawton would be that. But I don't want Tavares to be my matchup centerman. That was the point of bringing in Scott Lawton. So I don't like that suggestion. I think I'd try and keep Lawton at 3C and try to make that work. If we're 10, 15 games into this thing and it's just they can't find any chemistry with any trio, okay, maybe. If it's like break glass, okay, we know this can work potentially, but I'd rather give Lawton a much longer look here.
Well, I agree. I remember when I think it was in The Athletic. I think it was Jonas Siegel that kind of brought up the idea that like he thinks that Lawton wasn't really that ideal 3C, and I'm like, we won't know until you see it, right? And I'm willing to give it time. I don't think I'm not at the point where I'm ready to move off of Lawton on 3C just because it's only been 2 games and they're 2 road games, and you're very limited practice time too. Yeah. They've really only had 1 practice, so hopefully with this game against Florida we start to see something emerge, because these are critical games coming up.
Here's what my ideal line looks like. I think right now, this is what I would try if I was Berube. This is what I would do: Domi, Matthews, Nylander, Nyes, Tavares, Marner, McMahon, Lawton, Yarncroc. That would be the top 9 that I roll with, and pick whatever 4th line you want to put out there. You want to have Robertson in there, sure. I don't think he belongs or fits on a 4th line role. So for me, it probably would be like Lorentz, Kampf, and Pontus Holmberg. Like that'd be the 4th line that I'd probably would chuck out there. Like that would be the lineup that I think I'd roll with at this point and see if he can find chemistry there. For whatever reason, they don't seem to be giving Yarncroc a lot of minutes or a lot of responsibility right now. I get it. He hasn't played in a long time, so I guess they're easing him into action. But at some point, I'd like to see what a top 9 like that could look like, personally. But we'll see. We'll see what we get. Possibly we'll see something in the next game tomorrow night against the Florida Panthers. All right, Dave, you got another one, and we'll get to it on the other side. You're listening to the Locked On Leafs podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day.
Today's edition of the Locked On Leafs podcast is brought to you by Indeed. You just realized your business needed to hire somebody yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop trying to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored job posts at the top of the page, and they help you find the right candidates fast. You've been trying to find somebody for that job and you need to hire them quick, almost like it's yesterday. The pressure's on, and every day without the right person is a setback. That's why with Indeed sponsored jobs, it really does come in handy. They make sure your post is seen by the right candidates right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now. Support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring Indeed is all you need.
Welcome back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. Mike DiStefano, Dave Morassutti with you. It's an off day in Leafland, Toronto. The game tomorrow against the Florida Panthers. And make sure you check back into the Locked On Leafs podcast. We'll do a full preview show on tomorrow's episode. For today, we've been playing a little cosign, no sign, the return of cosign, no sign. And Dave, I believe you've got the next one. So why don't you hit me with it? What do you got?
Well, it's a wild card look ahead for the final wild card spot, and we got I say it's a 5-team race, in my opinion, right now. You got Ottawa, Columbus, Montreal, New York, and then the Boston Bruins with the 2-game win streak have kind of kept themselves in it. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a good chance we see a Toronto-Ottawa first round matchup. Battle of Ontario.
I think there's a chance I think there's a good chance we see it if Toronto wins the division, obviously. So that's what it really comes down to. Because right now you look at it, Ottawa is slated to play Florida in round 1. That's the way we got it set right now. Washington will play the second wild card team in the Columbus Blue Jackets as it sits now. I think Ottawa clearly has the advantage over the other teams. They've won, 4 in a row now too. So they're really rolling. They got 73 points. They're 5 points up on that trio of teams: Montreal, New York, and Boston. Maybe Detroit's still in there as well at 66 points. I think they could potentially sneak in with a hot stretch. But I guess I got to co-sign it because we already talked about earlier how Toronto could finish atop of the table and win this division. And then I believe that Ottawa is probably the best team out of that group of like 5, 6 that are vying for those wild card spots. They've got 3 points in hand on Columbus, 5 on the other teams. So I'm going to co-sign it. I think it could happen. I believe that was if I'm not mistaken, my prediction at the beginning of the year was we'd see a Battle of Ontario in round 1. So I guess I'll stick with it and co-sign that, Dave. And man, wouldn't that be great to see the Leafs, Sens? Because look, as much as Toronto has struggled with Ottawa in the regular season over the last few years, they always kick the Senators' ass in the playoffs. Always.
Yeah.
So I'd love to ignite that rivalry once again.
Who do you think is your lockstep for the who do you think is your favorite right now for the second one? Because that's the juicier story right now.
Well, I'm glad you asked, Dave. Cosign, no sign. The Blue Jackets have been one of the best stories in hockey this season and will hang on to their wild card spot.
I'm going to co-sign that they've been a top story this year, but I'm no signing on them making the playoffs.
No, you're not a believer in the Columbus Blue Jackets, huh?
I think they'll just miss out. Like an unbelievable story, incredible given everything that's gone with that team this year, and credit to them for finding, a way to be competitive once again. I just look at it as, look at the teams that are chasing them right now. All right. I know that New York has been a tire fire for most of the year, but that's a team right now I think that can really push them especially because they got the better talent, they got the better goaltender, and usually that should play out. Even Boston has looked pretty good since they've made those deals at the trade deadline. Like sometimes teams that make those moves kind of get rejuvenated a little bit and they go on a bit of an unlikely run. I think you could see that with Boston. So I think I'm not a believer in Montreal still. Like I'm not even putting Montreal into this category right now. I think they're playing with a little bit of house money. I don't think they have the talent to be like, I think if you had to ask me between like a Columbus Montreal, I'll take Columbus. I think Columbus has got.
So for you, it's basically like the Rangers and Columbus. It's almost a 50-50 split for you on those two teams.
And I know again the Rangers have lost 2 in a row, so it doesn't really help my argument that much. But I just think that given everything that the Rangers have been through, they have still remained in contention. For this,
they got a roster. It's the far better roster. Yeah. I think everybody can acknowledge that. I wonder how many more. I think Columbus has quite a few home games still remaining, and they've got a great home record though. 26-4 at home, just 11-19-4 on the road. They've got more home games. What would that give them? An extra 12 home games?
They have a game against each other, Columbus and New York on Saturday.
What is the I'm curious. The Rangers have the 9th most difficult schedule remaining. And where is Columbus? They have the 6th most difficult schedule remaining. So both with, pretty hard skeds down the stretch. So we'll see. They'll have to beat some good teams here. Ottawa, of that group, Ottawa 25th best hardest schedule. So one of the easier schedules. Boston has a pretty easy schedule also in their final 16 games. Opponents averaging just a 533 win percentage going forward. All right, Dave. Interesting. We'll see what happens in the playoffs, but man, is it ever going to be a fun little? It's a race at the top of the Atlantic. Absolutely, it's going to be a race at the top of the Atlantic. Then it's going to be a race for those final wild card spots. I think there's 5, maybe 6 teams if Detroit can find a way to get back on track. They've lost 6 in a row here, but if they can get back on track, I think they're only 4 points out of it. I mean, they definitely can get back into this thing with a hot week or two. So I'll give it 6 teams, 2 spots. Who can get it done? Should be a fun final couple of weeks here, 6 weeks or so in the regular season. There's quite the battle going on out west too, to be honest. I think it's Calgary, Vancouver, St. Louis, and Utah, all within 3 points of each other. 1 spot available in the West. So 1 spot, 4 teams in the West, 2 spots, 6 teams in the East. Should be a fun final 6 weeks to see how that all shakes out. All right, that's going to do it for us here today on the podcast. I'd like to thank you all for listening and supporting the show. You can subscribe to the Locked On Leafs podcast on all platforms and receive daily Leafs content. Follow myself at Mickey_Canuck. Follow Dave at D_Morassutti, and follow the show as well at Locked On Leafs. We'll be back with another episode for you guys tomorrow. The Maple Leafs taking on the Florida Panthers. We'll preview it on tomorrow's show. But until then, keep it locked right here on Locked On Leafs.